The following program is a special presentation of the Big Ten Network, produced in association with the University of Wisconsin.
No shortage of hot-button polarizing issues on the national political docket. A war plan for Afghanistan, a healthcare bill in the Senate, 9/11 terrorists on trial, and even Sarah Palin coming out with her new book. We'll look into the stories behind the news and analyze the public's take with an expert from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Next, during office hours. Hi, I'm Ken Goldstein, professor of political science at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Healthcare, terrorism, war plans, unemployment levels. What's going on and what are Americans thinking? Joining me today to discuss a variety of political issues is Charles Franklin. Charles is a political science professor at UW-Madison and co-founder of pollster.com and a frequent guest on Office Hours. Charles, welcome.
Good to be back.
Let's begin talking about a number that's very important to political professionals and closely tracked by the national media, which is the president's approval numbers. Where are Obama's approval numbers now? How does that compare to his previous? How does that compare to past presidents in that?
He's at 51. 51's the big number right now. His disapproval rating's a bit lower than that, and that varies from poll to poll, but say in the mid-40s or low 40s. The key thing, I think, is that Obama's approval rating fell steadily over the late spring and throughout the summer. But since the end of August, since September 1st, it's been remarkably stable. It's like the country came back from summer vacation and really hasn't changed very much. It means that all of the protests, the angry town halls, the tea parties over the summer had their effect over the summer, but really it seems that the Obama administration's managed to smooth things out since then. Now, the other historical perspective is that 51% right now is a little bit lower than the average president this far into their first year in office. One of the myths of Obama is that he started with approval ratings in the stratosphere. That's actually false. He started about the fourth or fifth highest approval rating of the post-war presidents, and fourth or fifth is not that many. So he was above average, but not much above average at the beginning, sort of in the mid-60s. That rapidly fell into the low 60s, and then over the summer fell to around 50 or so. There's been very slight rebound to get back to 51. So I think the main thing the White House would be celebrating right now is they stopped the fall that they were suffering through the summer, but they haven't managed to reverse and raise his approval rating, but it's no longer going down.
White House is following it. It's reported like the weather, news, or football scores. Why do we care about presidential approval?
Right. Well, it really matters for the president getting things done in Congress. Congressmen look around and they say, what does the president want me to do? What do my constituents want me to do? If Barack Obama currently had a 65% approval rating, which, by the way, is about where Bill Clinton was through much of his second term, he would be having much more success in convincing Democrats in Congress to go along with his health care bill and other legislation he cares about, and he'd be pressuring Republicans to wonder if they really wanted to go up against such a popular president. But he's not at 65. At 50, 51, 52, he's not unpopular with the public, but he doesn't have that added clout that he would have if his approval ratings were much higher. And so it hurts him there. The second place is looking ahead to the 2010 midterm elections. Presidential approval is a very powerful predictor of how well the president's party does in the midterms, and that's still a ways off. But it's important down the road as well.
Even looking forward, so not so much as an indicator of whether or not he's going to get reelected or not, but a measure of potential clout.
At this point, I think we do no good to look ahead to 2012, but we do good to look ahead to 2010. And more importantly, is health care going to pass before Christmas, after New Year's, before spring break? The more popular he is, the more likely he is to get things through.
So that aggregate or gross public approval number, presidential approval number, 51%, there's components of that. It's not, there's different sorts of people have different opinions. How does that break down? We talk about Democrats, independents, Republicans.
There sure are, and the breakdowns are really important. One part is he holding his coalition together? And the answer to that is mostly yes within the Democratic Party. Among Democrats, his approval rating is still an astronomical 86%. Among independents, it's about 48, 49%, just a little bit below his overall rating, but not dramatically below. Among Republicans, it's all the way down to 18%. And that's, again, not surprising, but the contrast between Republicans at 18, Democrats at 86 is a very good indicator of just how polarized opinion has become. It took a long time before George Bush's approval ratings were as polarized as Barack Obama's are now less than a year into his administration.
So Rahm Emanuel sitting in the White House or other political professionals, they're not so concerned about what Republicans think of President Barack Obama. They're keeping their eye on obviously independents, and then they're obviously keeping their eye on their Democratic base. And we're going to have let's go to break now, and we'll continue our discussion of especially of independents when we return. Hope you'll stick with us on Office Hours as we discuss politics and public opinion today.
This program is a production of the University of Wisconsin-Madison. If you have comments about this broadcast, please email them to programming@uc.wisc.edu.
For more than 100 years, the University of Wisconsin has been inspired by the Wisconsin idea,
which says the good work of the university extends to the boundaries of the state and beyond.
So the UW works hard to help build Wisconsin's economy.
Educate people of all ages.
Advance health and medicine.
And enhance the quality of life for all of us.
Hit it!
The University of Wisconsin-Madison. Forward thinking.
Welcome back to Office Hours. I'm with Charles Franklin, my colleague in the Political Science Department here at UW-Madison, and also the co-founder of pollster.com. So Charles, we were talking about presidential approval and the components among different segments of the electorate of presidential approval. What's been the trend with independents? Because that's something that political folks pay attention to.
They sure do. And independents have, for the most part, tracked Obama's overall approval while falling a couple of points below the overall rating. As we went through the summer, independents sank a little more than 2 points below his overall rating. Since then, just like the rest of the public, they've been very flat, maybe even gained 1 point or so. So a lot of the discussion about independents has been about, are they deserting Obama or not? And at least on these measures of presidential approval, I think the answer is very clearly no. They're behaving very much like they've been behaving, and they've been stable for the last 3 months.
Okay. I want to come back to a discussion of independents, of swing voters in the 2009 elections. But you also mentioned the summer, and obviously health care was one of the big things happening over the summer. Protests, town halls, the summer ended or the fall began with Obama's speech. How's he ranking specifically on health care? We talked about his general favorability ranking. What do people think he's doing about health care?
With health care, his approval rating is towards the lower end of his list. I said overall his approval is about 51%. On health care, it's 46%, so it's a bit lower. But that 46
but
actually...
still net positive.
Net positive, but only a little bit net positive. But it represents a rebound from August. That's the other thing that's happened recently on the domestic front, is those protests over the summer, the Obama administration going on vacation for a good chunk of August. We saw a real decline in approval of his handling of health care down to the very low 40s. So currently at 46, that represents about a 5-point rebound for him with this very small plurality of voters approving of his handling of health care. And again, one of the persistent problems is the difficulty of explaining what the Obama health care package is when it's largely being written by Congress. And so the president gets a lot of the blame for what's going on, but has not asserted the control to really take over a bill, perhaps realistically thinking that Congress is going to write the bill they want anyway, but it really has left him hanging while his Democrats in Congress have shown us legislation as sausage making, which, as everyone knows, is not a pretty sight.
So a slight rebound from the summer of drama over health care on the domestic side. Of course, presidents don't get to choose what they have to deal with all the time. And the other big issue in foreign policy is Afghanistan. And whatever the opposite word of rebound is, that's what's going on with Afghanistan.
This is not just the opposite of rebound. This is plummet would be a better word for it. The president came into office saying that he was going to end the fighting or the troop commitment in Iraq, but that he was going to increase in Afghanistan, that we would treat Afghanistan as the serious war that he said we should have treated it as all along. And approval rating for him on that issue was in the low 60s through the spring and the very early part of the summer. Since then, it has fallen off the table down to the lowest of all his job approvals, 41% approval on his handling of Afghanistan. The president is obviously going through a protracted decision-making process of what our commitment in Afghanistan should be, what our strategy should be, how many troops to move there, and at what price, both in lives and money. But he's paid a huge price for that in approval.
And a price with his own base, right?
With his own base, and because Republicans, as we know, are not approving of much he does no matter what. But there are a lot of Democrats that think the right solution was to end both of these wars, and that flies actually in the face of Obama's campaign promises to treat Afghanistan as a necessary war. And so at 41%, he runs a real risk that if he fails to sell his decision to the public, regardless of whatever that decision is, if he fails to sell it, then approval there is looking to fall into the 30s and could be the anchor around his neck, dragging him down into the depths that George Bush last plumbed with a very unpopular war in Iraq. So whether it's an increased commitment that leads to better outcomes or a decreased commitment that says, let's declare victory and pull out, he has to sell either one of those to the American public, or he's going to have a major component of his approval being weighed down.
Okay. When we come back, please stay with us. We're going to discuss 2009 elections that just happened and the 2010 elections that are going to be on us faster than we think. So please stay with us on Office Hours. Welcome back to Office Hours with Charles Franklin from the Department of Political Science and co-founder of Pollster.com. Charles, we talked about how the White House pays attention to presidential favorability numbers. They may have come out and said, well, 2009 was 2009 and all about local, but there's probably one number they were paying attention to and had to be concerned with. We've talked about independents, and Obama did very well with independents in the 2008 election in Virginia and New Jersey, and those independent voters deserted the Democratic nominees in both those states.
They vanished. Obama won Virginia by a small margin, 49-48. He won New Jersey 51-47. So, you know, wins. And for a Democrat to win Virginia independence was quite a coup. Virginia went to 66% Republican, 33% Democrat.
For independent voters.
For independent voters. And in New Jersey, it went to 60%, 30 and 9 for an independent candidate. So those were horrible numbers for the Democrats. And a lot of Democrats and pundits have been wringing their hands about that, arguing that it represents a failure of the party to sell itself to independents and to bring them back in. Part of that's the economy, but part of, and Obama's role in that, but another part of it is that Tip O'Neill said all politics is local, and governor's elections are significantly local. There are reasons you can point to both of those campaigns for why Democrats should have done poorly. Not so strong candidates, difficult times for incumbent governors, and so on. But I think the lesson is independents will move with the times. They'll move with the forces that are pushing favorable or unfavorable towards a candidate. They're not owned by Barack Obama, nor are they owned by Republicans. They're up for grabs, and both parties have to remember that.
And again, to reiterate what we talked about before, those independents have 51, 52% approval rating of Obama nationally, and obviously keeping an eye on it. To what extent, maybe get geeky here for a second, is the change in independents in Virginia or New Jersey sort of people changing their minds, or the composition of independents? Because I hear some people say that, you know, those independents, they're really Republicans, and the Democratic independents weren't the ones that turned out, and they're more likely to turn out in a 10 or a 12.
I think there's certainly some shifts of both. We know that over the last few years, Republicans have declined as a group in the electorate, and independents have grown a bit. Well, obviously, if Republicans are no longer calling themselves Republicans and are now saying they're independent, and if indeed some of the old independents are now calling themselves Democrats, that leaves an independent pool that's a bit more Republican-leaning than it used to be. So there is an element of that. There's also the element that turnout did change in Virginia. One of the problems is the categories of voters that voted shifted a bit at the margin, but not as dramatically as the vote direction, the split of the vote did. But you can never know whether it's because more Republican-leaning independents came out to vote and more Democratic-leaning ones stayed home. So that's really still a bit of a mystery. We don't have the data to definitively answer that question. I think the best way to leave it, though, is the practical politics of it. Independents have to be wooed, they have to be convinced that a party has their interests in mind, and they have to like the candidate that's running for that party in order to vote for them. That's just politics 101, and both parties would be well advised to remember it and act on it in their next round of elections.
And then when we come back on Office Hours, we'll talk about that next round of election, Politics 101 in the 2010 elections, coming up on Office Hours.
This program is a production of the University of Wisconsin-Madison. If you have comments about this broadcast, please email them to programming@uc.wisc.edu.
Welcome back to Office Hours, talking about politics today with Charles Franklin from the Department of Political Science and co-founder of pollster.com. So, Charles, we both try and stay scrupulously nonpartisan, and we never get to spin. So let's spin for each side now as we look towards the 2010 elections. So if you were spinning or making an argument whether Republicans are going to do well in 2010, I guess the first thing you'd say is the party that's in the presidency always loses seats, and in 06 and 08, the Democrats won 54 seats. A lot of them they had no business winning, so Republicans should do well. What else would you say if you were spinning for the Republicans?
Those things are clearly there. The other side is if Obama's at 51% now, where will he be a year from now? Historically, he could easily be down 10 points from that. He could also easily be up 10 points. So there's an awful lot of uncertainty about where he will end up. One of the key questions is what happens to the economy? If the economy really did bottom out this past summer, then there's a fair hope for Democrats that an improving economy through the 2010 calendar year puts them in a position to lose fewer seats than they otherwise would. You mentioned the historical record. Only 3 times in 100 years has a party failed to lose seats in the first midterm of a presidency. 2 of those were recent, 1998 and 2002. The other was 1934. And so the record is very strong that presidents will lose seats. The question is how much. If the Democrats lose 10, 12, 15, that's better than expected. If they lose 15 to 25, that's pretty close to the historical norm. If they go over 20, 25, 30, then it's looking like a real rebuff to the Democrats and the president.
So natural order of things, they should lose, pay attention to Obama approval, pay attention to unemployment, and then turnout's going to be a big deal.
One of the things we talk a lot about is unemployment, because the issue is how fast or slow will that start to come down. One thing, though, is the historical record shows that rising incomes and rising gross domestic product are better predictors of the midterm than the unemployment. So we hear folks like me talk about unemployment a lot, and that's a big concern of the public. It doesn't have as strong a track record predicting vote, though, as income per capita or GNP.
So if you were talked about some spin for the Republicans, what would be an argument for the Republicans doing well? If you were arguing on behalf of more modest Democratic losses, you'd probably point to the fact that Republican Party ID has stayed pretty steady. What other things would you say if you were trying to buck Democratic spirits?
Yeah, if I were trying to buck them up, I would say that they have a president who can rebound, that 12 months is an eternity in politics. Obama has shown in the past an ability to rally. Maybe he can rally in this period. The other side is candidate recruitment matters hugely. When you have good candidates, you tend to win. When you have bad candidates, you tend to lose. Both parties have been fighting to recruit, But right now the Republicans are really divided between the very conservative wing of the party that we saw get involved in the New York special election this year and fracture the party. You end up with a kind of suicide pact among Republicans on these primary fights. So they have to find a way to solve their divisions within the party.
So speaking of possible divisiveness on the Republican side, and we're on cable TV, so I think by law we need to talk about Sarah Palin here. So Sarah Palin, in that race in New York 23, she actually endorsed the conservative. She's getting a tremendous amount of publicity this week and drawing enthusiastic crowds. Talk to me about where Sarah Palin stands with the public and what's your read on what she's going to do down the line and her influence on who the Republicans pick as nominees in places like Florida in 2010.
Well, first of all, in her first book tour stop, she clearly rocks in Grand Rapids. It's very interesting that the schedule of her tour is in a lot of medium and small-sized cities. She's not hitting the big urban areas. She's clearly going where her base is, where you have conservative religious voters who like her way better than the public as a whole. One of the interesting polls that came out this week looked at whether people thought she was qualified to be president. That perception of her qualification to be president has just fallen steadily since she was picked for vice president. So it's now down in the 30% range. Whether the book tour turns that around or not, it's guaranteed to put her back in the public eye very prominently. Somebody said television and Sarah Palin have a codependency problem. It really is true. Both feed off of the other. So she'll be very prominent in these things, and it's clear from the amazing lines in Grand Rapids of people standing out all day to get her to sign their book that she still has the star power to draw in people. The big question is, does she have the star power to convince them in the long run to come over to her side? And what role does she play in the party?
Charles, thanks again for joining us on Office Hours. That's all our time today. If you want to see some of the other topics we've covered, please look us up on the web at officehours.poli.wisc.edu. From the University of Wisconsin-Madison, this has been Office Hours. Thanks for stopping by.
The preceding program was produced by the University of Wisconsin in association with the Big Ten Network.